I turned 29 and got a text from Dad. Hope you had cake or something. No call. No visit. A week later, he sent another. We're throwing Mom's retirement party. $2,000 per person. I was invited, but only his wallet. No one mentioned my birthday. No one asked how I was. I didn't respond. I just stopped the $3,200 I'd been sending every month, covering their mortgage, insurance, and repairs. I, 29M, turned 29 last Tuesday, and the only acknowledgement from my father was a text at 11:47 p.m. Hope you had cake or something. No call. No visit. Just those 5 words that felt like an afterthought. I stared at my phone screen in my empty apartment, the glow illuminating the untouched birthday cake I'd bought for myself. 29 years old, and this was what my relationship with my parents had become: casual texts and financial expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me. For the past 3 years, I'd been sending them $3,200 every month. Their mortgage payment, homeowners insurance, property taxes, and whatever repairs their aging house demanded. Dad had called it helping family when he first asked. Mom had cried about losing the house where they'd raised me. I couldn't say no. But apparently, remembering my birthday was too much effort. A week passed without another word from either of them. Then, last Wednesday, another text from Dad popped up while I was reviewing quarterly reports at work. We're throwing Mom's retirement party next month. $2,000 per person. You're invited. I read it 3 times, waiting for the follow-up message. Something asking about my birthday. Something inquiring how I was doing. Something that showed they saw me as more than a walking ATM. Nothing came. $2,000 per person. They expected me to pay $4,000 to attend my mother's retirement party, on top of the $3,200 I already sent monthly. I did the math quickly. In 3 years, I'd given them over $115,000. My savings account, once healthy from years of careful budgeting and overtime work, had dwindled to almost nothing. And they wanted more. I called my younger sister that evening. She lived across the country, building her own life, blissfully unaware of the financial arrangement I'd made with our parents. When I told her about the retirement party cost, she laughed. She thought I was joking. Her laughter died when I explained the monthly payments. The silence stretched long enough that I checked if the call had dropped. Finally, she asked why I'd never mentioned it before. I told her Dad had made it sound temporary, just until they got back on their feet after his job loss 2 years ago. Temporary had become permanent. Help had become expectation. She asked if they knew about the sacrifices I'd made. The vacation I'd canceled last year. The car I was still driving despite it needing major repairs. The studio apartment I'd moved into to save money, giving up the 2-bedroom place I'd loved. I realized they didn't know because I'd never told them, and they'd never asked. That night, I lay in bed calculating everything. The $45,000 in my 401k that I'd borrowed against to help with their emergency roof repair. The credit card debt I'd accumulated covering the gap between my salary and their needs. The promotion opportunity I'd turned down because it required relocating, and they'd made it clear they needed me nearby and financially available. I was drowning, and they were asking me to buy them a life preserver. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer to their account. $3,200 that had vanished from my checking account on the 15th of every month for 36 months would now stay put. My phone stayed silent for 3 days. On the 4th day, Dad called. Not texted, called. The first time he'd actually dialed my number in months. He sounded confused, asking if there was a problem with my bank. The mortgage payment hadn't gone through. The insurance company was sending notices. I told him I'd decided to stop sending the monthly payments. The confusion in his voice shifted to panic, then anger. He reminded me that they were my parents. That family helps family. That they'd raised me, fed me, put a roof over my head for 18 years. He said I was being selfish and ungrateful. I let him finish before responding. I asked him when he'd last asked about my life. When he'd last called just to check in. When either of my parents had shown interest in my well-being beyond my bank account balance. He went quiet. I told him about the birthday text. About the retirement party invitation that came with a price tag, but no genuine desire for my presence. About feeling like a financial resource rather than a son. I explained that I'd been paying their bills while neglecting my own future, my own stability, my own happiness. He said I was overreacting. That parents shouldn't have to ask about their adult children's lives. I should volunteer information. that the birthday text showed he was thinking of me, that the retirement party was a family celebration, and of course it cost money. I asked him how much my brother was contributing monthly. Another silence. I asked how much my sister was expected to pay for the retirement party. He said that was different. They had their own families to worry about. I told him I had my own life to worry about too. The call ended with him saying he needed to discuss this with Mom, that they'd call me back. That was 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, Mom finally called. She was crying before she even said hello. She told me how hurt she was that I'd abandoned them, how they might lose the house, how Dad's new job didn't pay enough to cover everything, how she'd thought she raised me better than this. I listened to every word. When she finished, I asked her a simple question. When was my birthday? She went silent for a long moment before admitting she wasn't sure of the exact date. She knew it was in October somewhere. It was September 29th. She'd missed it by a month, and not for the first time. I told her that said everything I needed to know about where I stood in their priorities. I explained that I loved them, but couldn't continue sacrificing my own financial stability and emotional well-being for parents who saw me as a bank rather than a person. She said I was breaking her heart. I told her she'd broken mine first, one forgotten birthday and financial demand at a time. Update 1. 3 days after that conversation with Mom, my brother called. He'd never contacted me directly about family issues before. We usually just exchanged pleasantries at holidays. But apparently, our parents had reached out to him and my sister, explaining their financial crisis and painting me as the villain who'd cut them off without warning. He was angry, really angry. He accused me of being cruel and heartless, leaving our aging parents in financial ruin. He said he couldn't believe how selfish I'd become. When I tried to explain the 3 years of monthly payments, he cut me off. He already knew about the money. Dad had told him I'd been helping out a little with some bills. A little. $115,000 was helping out a little. I asked him how much he'd contributed over the years. He said he'd sent money for Christmas and birthdays, helped with some repairs when he visited. Maybe a few thousand total. When I told him the actual amount I'd been sending monthly, plus the 401k loan, plus covering emergency expenses, he went quiet. Then he asked why I'd never said anything. I realized that our parents had been managing the narrative carefully. To my siblings, I was the nearby son who helped out a little. To me, I was the primary financial support keeping them afloat. They'd compartmentalized their children, taking from me while maintaining their image with the others. My brother said he had no idea the situation was that serious. He promised to talk to Dad about contributing more, but explained that his mortgage and kids made large contributions difficult. I understood. I'd been in his position once, before I became the default solution to our parents' problems. After we hung up, I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication that someone finally understood the scope of what I'd been carrying alone. Sadness that it had taken a crisis for the truth to surface. Update 2. My sister called yesterday morning, and her tone was completely different from my brother's initial reaction. She'd spent the weekend doing her own calculations after talking to him. She'd also had a long conversation with Mom, asking detailed questions about their finances and my contributions. She was furious, but not at me. She discovered that Mom had been telling people at church and in their neighborhood that their children were so generous and supportive. She'd been accepting praise for raising such caring kids while I was the only one actually providing that support. My sister found old social media posts where Mom bragged about the family vacation they'd taken last year, funded entirely by my monthly payments, while thanking all her children for making it possible. But what really upset my sister was learning about my birthday. She'd called Mom specifically to ask about it, and Mom had initially insisted she'd called me. When pressed for details, she'd admitted to sending a text but claimed she'd been planning to call later. My sister asked why later never came, and Mom got defensive, saying I should have called to thank her for remembering it all. My sister told me she was ashamed of our parents. She offered to contribute what she could financially, though her teacher's salary didn't leave much room. More importantly, she offered something our parents never had: genuine concern for my well-being. She asked about my job, my apartment, my dating life. Simple questions that felt profound because no one in my family had asked them in years. She apologized for not staying in better contact, admitting that she'd assumed I was fine because I was always helping everyone else. That conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about childhood, about our parents' tendency to take more than they gave emotionally, about the difference between family obligation and family manipulation. She said something that stuck with me. They taught us that love is shown through sacrifice, but they never learned to love us back the same way. Update 3. The retirement party happened last weekend. I didn't attend. Instead, I spent Saturday morning apartment hunting. With the $3,200 staying in my account, I could afford to move back into a decent one-bedroom place. I found one with a small balcony, updated kitchen, and enough space for a proper home office. Saturday evening, while Mom's retirement celebration was presumably happening, I was at a housewarming party for a coworker. People asked about my family, and for the first time in years, I didn't make excuses for their absence from my life. I simply said we were going through a difficult period. Sunday morning brought a flurry of texts from various family members who'd attended the party. Apparently, Mom had spent significant time complaining about my absence and explaining how her ungrateful son had abandoned the family in their time of need. Several relatives had asked why they'd never heard about my financial contributions, which had made things awkward. My aunt, Mom's sister, sent me a private message saying she was shocked to learn the truth about the situation. She said she'd always wondered how my parents maintained their lifestyle after Dad's job loss, but had assumed they were managing on savings and his new employment. She told me that several family members were questioning the narrative they'd been given. But the most interesting text came from my cousin, who'd been at the party. She said the event felt strange and forced. Despite costing $2,000 per person, the food was basic, the venue was Mom's church fellowship hall, and the decorations looked homemade. She wondered where all the money had actually gone if it wasn't invested in the party itself. I realized that even the retirement party had been more about generating money than celebrating Mom. They'd charged family members premium prices for a budget event, probably pocketing the difference. That evening, Dad called. His tone was different, less angry, more desperate. He said they needed to talk in person. The mortgage company had sent a final notice, and they were facing foreclosure proceedings. He asked me to reconsider, just for a few more months, just until they could figure something out. I told him I'd already figured something out. I was rebuilding my own life. He said he didn't understand how I could be so cold to the people who'd raised me. I asked him how he could be so indifferent to the person who'd been supporting him. The conversation ended with him saying that family doesn't give up on each other, and me responding that I agreed, which was why their behavior hurt so much. Final update. It's been 6 weeks since I stopped the payments. My parents' house went into foreclosure last week. They're moving in with my brother and his family temporarily. My sister and I have both offered to help them find a small apartment they can actually afford on Dad's current salary, but they've refused our assistance. They want their house back, not a new life that matches their actual income. The family dynamics have shifted completely. Extended relatives who initially criticized me for abandoning my parents have started asking uncomfortable questions about financial responsibility and parental manipulation. My siblings and I have grown closer, bonding over the realization that we'd all been managed and manipulated in different ways throughout our lives. I signed the lease on my new apartment yesterday. For the first time in 3 years, I'm putting money into my own savings account instead of someone else's mortgage. I'm planning a vacation for next month, something I haven't done since this whole situation began. My phone still shows missed calls from my parents periodically, but I've stopped answering them. I've said everything I need to say. They know my terms for rebuilding our relationship. Acknowledge the financial and emotional burden they placed on me, apologize for treating me like a resource instead of a person, and demonstrate that they value me beyond my bank account. So far, they've chosen pride over their son. Yesterday was my 30th birthday. I spent it with friends, eating dinner at a restaurant I'd been wanting to try but couldn't afford when I was paying my parents' bills. My phone stayed silent all day, no late-night text from Dad, no forgotten call from Mom. But my sister called at exactly midnight to be the first person to wish me happy birthday. My brother sent a thoughtful card that arrived a week early. My coworkers decorated my desk and brought cake. I realized that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about people who show up for you, who remember what matters to you, who care about your well-being without expecting payment in return. My parents taught me an expensive lesson about the difference between love and obligation. It cost me over $100,000 in years of emotional damage, but I finally understand my worth. I'm worth more than $3,200 a month. I'm worth more than birthday texts sent as afterthoughts. I'm worth more than being someone's financial plan instead of their son. And for the first time in years, I'm starting to believe it.